Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Christie's and to this evening's sale of Impressionist and Modern Art. Lot 11 is the 1922 Picasso there, Buste Femme à la Chemise.
A Picasso painting torn from a German museum wall has resurfaced at auction in New York City.
$1,800,000, $4,900,000, $5 million, and $5 million, $6 million, $6,200,000, $6 million too. No, all done. And selling here then. Last chance at $6 million too. For you, sir. $6 million too, thank you.
The last time this Picasso was at auction, it sold for just $1,800 as part of a campaign to rid Germany of artwork condemned by the Nazis. Adolf Hitler purged art he hated, and he stole art he coveted.
The Nazis were not just the most systematic mass murderers in history, they were the greatest thieves. They stole everything.
Art of all kinds would be vulnerable to Hitler's plan. Paintings, sculpture, furniture, religious objects.
There's always been looting. There was planned looting done by Napoleon, but this was really industrial.
Along with looting, the Nazis unleashed a modern war that destroyed historic European architecture. In the struggle to defeat Hitler, the Allies would have to choose between saving lives and causing even more damage.
There is the age-old argument, which is of more value, a work of art or a human life.
Today, even after more than 60 years, lost art is still being found, battle damage is still being repaired, and stolen masterpieces are still caught up in bitter disputes. All of this is the unfinished business of the most destructive war in history.
This painting in Vienna, it's their Mona Lisa. This is their icon.
This is one of the most important images of Austrian art of the 20th century.
The painting was stolen by the Nazis during the war.
Today, the fate of Gustav Klimt's portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer still hangs in the balance. The painting can be seen at the Austrian National Gallery in Vienna, but it is one of many works of art whose ownership has been contested since the Nazis wrought havoc on the art world. Most people call this Viennese icon the Gold Portrait. Few think of it as a portrait of a Viennese Jew, and a reminder of the Jewish community that flourished here before World War II. When the Nazis occupied Austria, they stole the Klimt portrait from this building, then the home of Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer, a prominent Jewish art collector.
The Nazis commandeered the Bloch-Bauer home, and the various representatives of the museums came together and picked out paintings and porcelain and sculpture that they wanted for their collections. This is the document that sent the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer over to the Austrian gallery. And at the bottom of the document, it says, "I sign with Heil Hitler."
For years, Adele Bloch-Bauer's niece has been fighting a legal battle with the Austrian government for ownership of her aunt's portrait and 5 other Klimt paintings her family once owned.
I grew up with the paintings, so that when people ask me, do you remember the paintings? Well, yeah, every Sunday for lunch we were there, and the Klimt paintings were all in Adele's room. My uncle commissioned Klimt to paint the portrait of my Aunt Adele.
Adele and Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer were major patrons in Vienna's vibrant modern art scene before the war. Artists from all over flocked to Vienna to take part in the modernist revolution. While Klimt worked on Adele's portrait, 3 young artists were applying to Austria's top art academies. Egon Schiele, and Oskar Kokoschka both went on to become accomplished modern painters. The third was an unknown 18-year-old named Adolf Hitler.
Schiele and Kokoschka were accepted and Hitler was not. And Kokoschka always said jokingly, imagine if Hitler would have been accepted and I would have been rejected. I would have run the world quite differently, and he couldn't have done that harm that he did, being a bad painter.
In its basement archives, the Center for Military History in Washington, D.C. stores many Nazi paintings. Among them are early watercolors by Adolf Hitler.
He was a mediocre painter, not terrible, but clearly not gifted. He thought himself gifted, though. He certainly thought himself able enough to have been admitted to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and he took it as a real rejection. Many of the jurors at the Academy were Jewish, and I suspect that this fueled his anti-Semitism.
Generally, he hated what was going on in modern art as a would-be artist himself. There were Jewish artists around, heaven's sakes. Not only that, some of those figures looked like they were wild black Negroes from Africa. How come people like Nolde and Kandinsky can be shown and all this to do about them, and they don't let me shine as an artist? It must have riled him.
In a 1937 speech, Hitler shouted, "We will from now on lead an unrelenting war of purification, an unrelenting war of extermination against the last elements which have displaced our art." Hitler began with a purge of German museums, ordering them to cleanse their collections of some 16,000 works by modern masters like Matisse, Van Gogh, and Picasso. Hitler labeled all such works degenerate. Modern art was then ridiculed and condemned in a hugely successful degenerate art exhibit that toured Germany. And the best of the German museum's collections of modern art were auctioned off at fire sale prices to benefit the Reich. Thousands of purged artworks were simply burnt. Germany was destroying its own standing as a world leader in modern art. Hitler commissioned his first public building for Nazi Germany, the House of German Art in Munich. There he would display contemporary paintings and sculpture that glorified the Third Reich. It would be a museum for the new fascist art, overseen by Hitler himself.
It was actually very unusual for a head of state to get this involved in cultural matters, but it was all part of his really racist ideology, that everything had to be pure down to the last detail in Germany. Hitler would go with the curators of this thing and choose what was going to be in it. Year after year it went on right till the end of the war. And it was all for sale, but most of it had to be bought by the government because nobody really wanted it.
With the annexation of Austria in 1938, organized looting of Jewish property began on a massive scale. Even the German party leaders were surprised by the anti-Semitic fervor of Austrian Nazis.
The Austrians, they talk now about being the victims. They were never victims. Of course, there were some that were against it, but the overall was a royal welcome. Everything changed after March 11. It became a different life, a different city. When the Nazis came, they threw us out of the apartment, and the Gestapo men took the apartment for himself. We left Vienna. At that time, I didn't even think about what we are leaving behind because we only thought of saving our life.
The portrait of Maria's Aunt Adele by Gustav Klimt was just one of hundreds of artworks left behind when the Bloch-Bauer family fled Nazi Austria. After agents for Hitler, Göring and other Nazi officials chose what they wanted, the rest of the collection, including the Klimt paintings, was divided up among the state museums of Vienna. Some were returned to the family after the war, but the Klimt paintings still hang in the Austrian National Gallery.
I think there's a general understanding that these paintings belong simply to Austria. And we have reason for this. It's written down in a document. It's written down in the last will of Adele Bloch-Bauer.
Maria's aunt died in 1925 and left behind a handwritten will. And in this will, she asks that her husband give the paintings to the Austrian gallery upon his death. And what happened was, of course, that the paintings were taken from him, stolen by the Nazis before he died.
Adele's husband escaped to Switzerland in 1939 and died in exile after the war. He never got the Klimts back.
After the war, the Austrians decided not to return the paintings based on the claim that under Adele Bloch-Bauer's will of 1923, they had the right and title.
It's very, very clear that she always had in mind that these paintings should come at the end of the day to the Austrian gallery.
The paintings belonging in the museums, they have to be seen by the public, but not in Austria when they keep them there under a lie. What upsets me so is the total injustice that they don't admit that they are not theirs.
Today, the struggle over Adele Bloch-Bauer's portrait is just one of many such disputes still unresolved in the wake of the Nazi art looting machine. Linz, Austria, Hitler's provincial hometown, would be the site for the enormous Führer Museum. Hitler planned to turn Linz into the cultural capital of Europe. Starting from sketches he drew in his youth, he ordered his architects to prepare secret plans to remake this small industrial town into a grand imperial city.
In the town of Linz, he visualized an avenue up to the front, left and right, of different buildings, and I call it Hitler's Acropolis.
The Linz project is really connected to Hitler's legacy. There's going to be an opera house, a symphony hall, a great library. There's also going to be a mausoleum with his tomb. And at the center of the Linz complex is going to be the greatest museum, not only in Europe, but in the entire world. Dozens of galleries that would hold thousands of artworks.
The collection was for the state. Hitler thought the Reich should have a great art collection for prestige. This is going to be on a very big scale.
He is prepared to purchase the artworks, of course, but he has really no compunction about stealing them. This museum is going to be created both by purchase and by plunder.
Hundreds of Polish artworks were on Hitler's wish list, but for the Nazis, most of Poland's Slavic cultural patrimony wasn't worth stealing. Because the Nazis considered the Slavs, like the Jews, to be subhuman, Polish culture was declared degenerate and marked for destruction. In the capital Warsaw, even historic architecture was targeted, particularly the Warsaw Royal Castle, home of the Polish kings for 6 centuries, seat of the parliament, and a national treasure.
Mamy wielkie lustra, tak zwany fryz, widzicie, to jest ten ozdobny, sztukateria dookoła sali.
In 1939, Hitler ordered his forces to kill, without pity or mercy, all men, women and children of Polish descent and language, in the invasion and extermination of Poland.
Do następnej sali. I teraz wyobraźcie sobie, że wszystko to jest rekonstrukcją. Tu padły pierwsze bomby, niszcząc tą salę.
During the attack on Warsaw, Hitler personally ordered the shelling of the royal castle. He had been told of a Polish anthem that said, "As long as the Warsaw Castle stands, Poland is not yet lost." Damaged by shelling and stripped bare of art and furniture by Nazi looters, the castle still stood as the Germans took over Warsaw. But knowing the Poles' deep patriotic attachment to the castle, the Nazis bored holes in its foundation and filled them with explosives to create a permanent threat of complete destruction.
I drugi etap zniszczenia zamku to było w czasie powstania warszawskiego i po powstaniu. Wielkie Powstanie Warszawskie wybuchło 1 sierpnia 1944 roku.
After years of oppression, the people of Warsaw rose up to take back their city from the Nazis.
Najbardziej zacięte walki i najdłuższe walki trwały o Stare Miasto.
The Germans crushed the uprising, killing more than 200,000 Poles. And the Nazis made good their threat. The dynamite charges that had been placed 4 years earlier were detonated, destroying the Warsaw Castle completely.
Czasami pada takie pytanie, dlaczego zamek został odbudowany przez Polaków? Odpowiadam, z tej samej przyczyny, dla której został zniszczony przez Niemców. My, społeczeństwo, naród polski nie mógł żyć bez zamku.
In Krakow, the heart of the old city was preserved. Krakow was home to the art masterpieces most coveted by the Nazis. And here, systematic looting would begin in earnest.
Oczywiście ten ołtarz ma wielkie znaczenie, zwłaszcza dla Krakowa. Ten ołtarz jest po prostu, on zniewala swoją maestrią wykonania. Proszę popatrzeć na te postacie, na ich rozchwiane szaty, prawda, na ich takie wyraziste bardzo twarze.
Weizsäcker was a Bavarian who came to Krakow early in 15th century. For this altar, he used as models his neighbors from here. So it was a shock for Krakowians when it was opened. They saw the normal, regular faces of their neighbors being now saints, apostles.
The Nazis believed that all Germanic works of art should come back to the fatherland. And among these was the Wittstoss altarpiece. Now, it didn't matter that it had been commissioned for the church by the King of Poland. The thing that was important was that it had been done by a German artist and therefore should not be in the hands of an alien race, which was the Slavs.
The Poles had dismantled the 13-metre-high altarpiece and its life-size wooden figures and hidden them in the countryside. But within weeks of the invasion, the Nazis had tracked them down, and the altarpiece was shipped to Berlin.
It was a true loss for Krakowians. They were so accustomed that it belonged to this place that they couldn't find the way to their prayer without it.
Meanwhile, Nazi art plunderers looted hundreds of Poland's other masterpieces. They were compiled in an elaborate catalogue meant only for the eyes of Adolf Hitler. At the top of the list were Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine, Rembrandt's Landscape with a Good Samaritan, and Portrait of a Young Man by Raphael. The three priceless paintings were part of a small private collection in the museum in Krakow, owned by a noble family, the Czartoryskis.
W przeddzień II wojny światowej, to jest zawsze, w przeddzień każdej wojny, ogromnie trudna decyzja dla właścicieli, którzy posiadają tej klasy zbiory, czy zdecydować się na ukrycie ich na miejscu, czy zdecydować się na ewakuację. Jeden pomysł wywiezienia, drugi pomysł ukrycia jest tak samo zły. Wiadomo, że...
The Czartoryskis decided to hide the paintings at their country estate, 160 kilometers outside of Krakow.
The objects were brought down here to this cellar and placed in one of the alcoves, which was then walled up and covered over with plaster. Unfortunately, the comings and goings did not escape attention, and when the Germans arrived, they broke down the wall, and of course, being soldiers, what they took was all the gold objects. They left the pictures lying around on the floor. The Leonardo actually had a boot mark on it.
The three paintings were intended for Hitler's Linz Museum, but the new Nazi governor of Poland kept them in his private apartments in Krakow. After the war ended, the Leonardo and the Rembrandt were returned by the Allies to the Czartoryski Museum in Krakow. The Raphael has never been found.
If this Raphael were to come up for sale at auction today, it would be $100 million, definitely. It has a strange quality of fascination, and so that's why I suspect it's still out there somewhere.
W tej bazie danych oczywiście obrazem najcenniejszym jest portret młodzieńca Rafaela.
Inside the Polish Ministry of Culture, Monika Kunka and her colleagues have compiled a database of artworks stolen during the war that are still missing. The program contains 59,000 items, estimated to be just a tenth of Poland's total loss.
I dopóki nie będziemy mieli rzeczywiście wiarygodnych informacji, to pozostaje nam tylko i wyłącznie publikowanie zdjęcia tego obrazu i czekać chyba na następne pokolenie. Osoba, która bezpośrednio brała udział w rabunku, ta osoba odchodzi, jej dzieci, jej następcy nie mają już tych obaw, nie mają świadomości, skąd to pochodzi, w związku z tym decydują się na sprzedaż i wtedy rzecz dopiero może ujrzeć światło dzienne. Także teraz to, co nam pozostaje, to tylko czekanie.
Perhaps the most celebrated collection of art ever assembled under one roof, at the Louvre Museum in Paris, spans more than 12 kilometers of galleries and contains over 400,000 priceless works of art, the cultural patrimony of the people of France. After Germany conquered Poland, the French feared that Paris would become the next target of Luftwaffe bombing raids, and sitting at the heart of the city was the Louvre. Museum staff gathered around the winged victory of Samothrace as the museum director gave the order to evacuate the great treasures of the Louvre to castles outside of Paris.
Les équipes du musée s'étaient préparées. En fait, on sait que dès 1936, mais surtout en 1938, il y avait eu des exercices d'évacuation, essayant d'imaginer comment pourrait se passer une évacuation en cas de guerre.
Within hours of the evacuation plan being announced, the Louvre became an enormous packing yard. Since many of the museum staff had been called to the front, volunteers were recruited from all over Paris to help pack, from secretaries to shop workers to truck drivers. The greatest challenge was moving the 2,000-year-old winged Victory, which now had to descend the long staircase on her way to safety.
Imagine très bien l'esprit dans lequel cette œuvre a dû être retirée. Je pense à certainement une très grande tristesse de la part de ce tristesse, mais aussi sentiment de la prudence nécessaire pour essayer de préserver un des chefs-d'œuvre que le Louvre conserve.
Cette victoire ailée qui a l'air d'un bloc, elle est faite de centaines de morceaux. Et la descendre des marches au sommet desquelles elle règne, c'était un travail terrible parce qu'on s'attendait à ce qu'elle se brise en 1000 morceaux.
An eyewitness later recalled, the statue rocked onto an inclined wooden ramp. We were all terrified, and the silence was total as the Victory rolled slowly forward, her stone wings trembling slightly. The curator of sculpture sank down on the stone steps, murmuring, "I will not see her return." "37 convoys of 8 trucks each departed from the Louvre, leaving the vast museum virtually empty. In May 1940, the German army swept through Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and into France. It was a shock to the French, who had prepared for air raids, but not a full-scale invasion of their country.
All the works of art had to move in really chaotic conditions, along with millions of refugees who were on the road. There would be a truck full of Louvre paintings, and next to it would be another truck from the French treasury full of gold bars, and the government ministers speeding by in limousines. It was just total chaos, and the miracle is that the French collections really did survive almost intact.
The Mona Lisa had her own vehicle. She was put in an ambulance that was specially sealed to maintain a constant level of humidity.
There was a curator who rode in the ambulance with her, and it was so well sealed up that the curator, when they opened the ambulance, was unconscious, but the Mona Lisa was absolutely fine.
The Mona Lisa and other Louvre masterpieces arrived at castles and abbeys in the south of France. They would be periodically moved throughout the war to stay a step ahead of the Germans. The curators lived in the castles alongside the artworks. One married couple brought along their teenage daughter.
Mes parents leur avaient confié la Joconde, qui était un des rares, peut-être même le seul tableau du Louvre à avoir sa chambre à elle. C'est-à-dire qu'elle était dans une caisse de bois précieux. Et alors on ouvrait, et dans du velours ou du satin rouge, elle souriait.
Six weeks after the start of the invasion, France fell. Germany now controlled most of the European continent. The day after France surrendered, Hitler secretly flew to Paris before dawn, accompanied by his architect Albert Speer. It was his first and only visit to the city.
Der Führer trifft zu früher Morgenstunde überraschend in Paris ein und besichtigt bei seiner Fahrt durch die Stadt auch La Madeleine. Der Triumphbogen. ein Blick auf den Eiffelturm. Links vom Führer Professor Speer.
Hitler remarked to Speer, "It was a dream of my life to see Paris. I cannot say how happy I am to have that dream fulfilled today." Hitler told Speer that he had often considered destroying Paris. He ordered his architect to resume work on his grandiose plans for the rebuilding of Berlin. When they were completed, he said, "Paris will only be a shadow, so why should we destroy it?" Unlike his harsh treatment of the Slavic cities of Poland, Hitler preserved Paris as a sophisticated playground for German military officers. The Nazi high command enjoyed the pleasures of the city and bided its time over looting from the French.
The Nazi authorities knew that these works that they wanted on their hit list were in chateaus, but they refrained from seizing works in state collections. The Germans didn't want to antagonize the French or to incite open rebellion.
They did not have the resources to control every corner of France at that time. So the takeover of France was much more gradual.
First they would steal from the Jews, and then later they would acquire the works that they wanted from French state collections. There were a number of notable Jewish collections in France. Paris was the capital of the art market, and one had these great art-dealing dynasties, and they had huge collections.
A month into the Nazi occupation, Gestapo teams raided the galleries of the 15 leading Jewish art dealers.
The Seligman family was right up there among the top dealers in Paris. This is a photo of my father before the war, when he started his business. Goodness. My father specialized in old masters, and Goering visited the gallery in 1938 before the war, and my father actually threw him out of the gallery because he knew who Goering was and what he was trying to do. So, as a result, that was the first gallery they looted during the war.
The amount of art stolen from Jewish collectors soon grew so large that the Jeu de Paume Museum in the center of Paris was requisitioned for storage. The operation would be overseen by the anti-Semitic task force, known as the ERR. The Nazis made sure to keep up the appearance of legality. According to the new occupation laws, Jews who fled or were deported to death camps were stripped of their citizenship. The Nazis could then declare their property ownerless and available for plunder. Inside the archives of the National Museums of France is a volume of handwritten notes which traces the journey of the 16,000 paintings stolen from Jewish Parisians during the war. Compiled in great secrecy, it notes each work that entered the Jeu de Paume and the name of the family from which it was stolen. It is the work of Rose Valland, a dedicated curator who is today considered a heroine of France and certainly its most unlikely spy.
Au début de la guerre, Rose Valland a une quarantaine d'années. Elle occupe un poste relativement modeste au musée des Jeux de Paume. L'excellente idée de Jacques Jaujard, qui est alors directeur des musées nationaux, est d'essayer de tout faire pour maintenir Rose Valland sur place aux Jeux de Paume. Il faut s'imaginer Rose Valland, une femme qui n'est pas très grande, elle a un chignon tiré, elle a ses petites lunettes, elle est vraiment insoupçonnable. Et en plus, ni elle ni Jacques Jaujard n'ont prévenu les agents de l'ERR qu'elle parle allemand. Donc cette petite souris grise qui peut bien se faufiler dans le bâtiment, personne ne s'en méfie et en même temps, elle va pouvoir regarder, écouter tout ce qui se passe là.
Nobody knew that every night when she went home, with her remarkable memory, she kept a secret diary of what French paintings, owned publicly or privately, were taken by whom, sent where.
Rose Valland managed to stay at the Jeu de Paume, despite the constant danger of deportation or execution. In November 1940, she became concerned about unusual activity at the museum.
Rose Valland noticed there was great excitement that the pictures weren't just being inventoried, but all of a sudden they were being hung up on the walls, and there was clearly going to be a party or an opening of some kind, and indeed there was, because Goering himself came to the Jeu de Paume to see what was available for his collections and for Hitler's. He, of course, was clever enough to know that major works, such as Vermeer's Astronomer, which had been confiscated from the Rothschilds, should go to the Führer for the Linz Museum. But still, this opened up many possibilities of items that he could then take himself.
Over the next few years, Goering would visit the Jeu de Paume 20 times, taking over 700 works of art for himself.
Hermann Goering spent a great deal of time in Paris. Sometimes there's a disconnect. The Battle of Britain is raging, and Hermann Goering, overseeing the Luftwaffe in their critical moment, is taking breaks in Paris where he's visiting art dealers and restaurants and nightclubs, drinking champagne and eating oysters.
The loot from Goering's pleasure trips to Paris, the Netherlands and Belgium was shipped to the door of his palatial hunting lodge, Karenhall.
Karenhall is Goering's country estate, which was built outside Berlin. It was also the primary repository for his art collection.
It started off as a rather woodsy chalet, and it was very homey. It had a big fireplace, and it had a lot of stone built into it. But gradually it grew in size, and he redecorated, and it became utterly opulent and ostentatious.
It was added on to, and there were massive galleries, vast corridors with marble and tapestries and rugs and paintings and sculptures. I mean, we're talking about a collection of paintings alone that was probably about 1,700 paintings. As a comparison, that's more than the National Gallery of Art's European paintings collection.
Historian Nancy Yeide is trying to compile the first complete inventory of Hermann Goering's art collection. One of Yeide's goals is to locate paintings looted by Goering that went missing after the war, including a small painting by François Boucher, stolen from André Seligman in Paris.
We were looking for this Boucher, and we were surprised to find an image on the Utah Museum of Fine Arts website that matched the lost Seligman Boucher. The Utah Museum had no idea that this was a confiscated and unrestituted picture.
Well, I first became aware that the Boucher painting was found when a woman came to see me. And she said, "We found a painting of yours, and it's in a museum, and they're willing to cooperate."
A painting stolen by Nazis and recovered in Utah is going home. The story coming up on 2 News.
The museum's executive director calls it an important day.
The art loss register provided evidence that we did not have rightful ownership, and on that basis we initiated the decision to return the painting to the rightful heirs of André Seligman.
Good morning. I'm the daughter of André Seligman. This is a very emotional day for me. We are very excited to get this painting from the museum, and they have been really, I can only use the word adorable about this.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
You know, my father would have wanted me to have this painting, and it's just a shame that he didn't live to see any of this going on.
Well, I was a little sad when I began to think about returning the painting. It's been an important part of our permanent exhibits. But I also saw the larger moral responsibility. We can't make amends for the millions of lives that were taken, but we can do something, simple, return something stolen, and confer a little humanity back on all of us.
In occupied Paris, trains packed with stolen art continued to leave for Germany. More than 22,000 items will be shipped to the Reich. But the theft of fine art was just the beginning. Now, the ERR began a new, more radical project.
À partir de mars 1942, l'ERR décide qu'il faut procéder à l'action meuble, la Möbelaktion, c'est-à-dire le pillage radical des appartements laissés derrière eux par les Juifs des pays de l'Europe occidentale.
The Union of Parisian Movers was forced to supply 150 trucks and 1,200 workers a day to help carry out the operation.
C'est donc un pillage comme on en a rarement vu, puisqu'il est radical et puisqu'il prend à la fois des objets de valeur et des objets qui n'ont strictement aucune valeur. Donc c'est un objectif matériel, mais c'est aussi dans une perspective de disparition d'un peuple et de sa mémoire.
Alors vous voyez, ici, tout a changé. Ici, il y a les grands moulins de Paris. Et là, ce sont les entrepôts où nous avons travaillé.
Jacques Altman, a young Parisian Jew, was about to be deported to a death camp in Poland when he was held back and transferred to a new slave labor camp set up at a train station in the center of Paris. At the camp, Jewish prisoners were forced to sort, clean, repair and pack stolen Jewish belongings that were then sent to families in Germany.
C'est pour ça que les nazis ont choisi cet endroit-là, à cause des embranchements des rails de chemin de fer qui allaient vers l'est. Ils amenaient des gros camions à l'intérieur de la cour. Là, c'était nous, c'était des détenus comme nous qui déchargeaient les camions. Les tableaux étaient triés. Il y avait des experts en tableaux avec nous. Ils triaient les tableaux. J'ai aussi aperçu parfois des officiers allemands qui venaient choisir tout ce qui les intéressait. Comme ils étaient certainement connaisseurs, ils choisissaient les tableaux de valeur qui étaient exposés. C'était une période très difficile. J'avais perdu toute ma famille, mes parents, tous mes frères. Nous étions une famille de 5 garçons. Un jour, j'ai reconnu des affaires de mes parents. Et là, j'ai vu les photos, j'ai vu nos meubles. Ça m'a fait comme un choc. Et parce que comme il y avait plein de valises, et j'ai ramené aussi des valises, j'ai pris une valise et j'ai rempli cette valise le maximum de photos. J'ai pris ma mère quand elle était jeune, j'ai pris mon père quand il était jeune. J'avais même des photos quand ils se sont mariés à Prague. Enfin, tout ça, je ne l'ai plus. Hein. Quand j'étais déporté à Birkenau, il fallait tout laisser sur place et tout a été détruit. J'ai perdu tous les souvenirs de ma famille.
As train after train rolled eastward, carrying Jews to concentration camps, others followed, loaded with their property and works of art.